I never planned for it to happen like this. If someone had told me a year ago that I would end up sneaking around with my sister's best friend, I would have laughed it off without hesitation. Not the awkward kind of laugh either, the kind that shuts the idea down completely. The kind that says that's not who I am. But life doesn't really ask permission before it rearranges you. It started in the most ordinary way possible: noise. My house was never quiet on weekends. My sister, Julia, had a way of turning every space into something louder than it needed to be. Music too high, conversations overlapping, the constant rhythm of footsteps and laughter spilling through hallways like the house itself couldn't contain her energy. And always with her was Sarah, her best friend. At first, that was all she was to me. A name attached to my sister's life. Someone who existed slightly to the side of my attention, like background noise you don't realize you've been hearing until it suddenly stops. Sarah didn't demand attention. She didn't try to take it either. She just existed in a way that made her presence feel natural, like she had always been part of the room before you noticed her standing in it. The first time I really saw her, not just registered her, wasn't dramatic. No cinematic pause. No sudden realization that changes everything. She was standing in our kitchen, holding a glass of water with both hands, leaning slightly against the counter like she was anchoring herself there. Julia was in the living room talking loudly about something I wasn't paying attention to, and Sarah was half listening, smiling at the right moments, nodding in the right places. Then she looked at me. Not surprised. Not curious. Just aware. Like I was part of the environment she hadn't fully processed yet. That was it. That should have been nothing. And yet something about it stayed with me longer than it should have. After that day I started noticing her in fragments. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she paused half a second before answering questions, like she weighed honesty against comfort. The way she laughed quietly first, almost like she was testing whether it was safe to fully let go. None of it was directed at me. That would have been simple. Easy to categorize. Easy to ignore. But it wasn't. It was just who she was. And that was the problem. Because people like that don't ask to be noticed. They just become impossible not to. At some point, Sarah started coming over more often. Sometimes with Julia. Sometimes alone. The first time she came without her, she stood near the doorway longer than necessary, holding her phone like it was a lifeline. "I can leave if it's weird," she said. I remember answering too quickly. "It's not weird." That made her pause just slightly. Then she smiled, small and uncertain. "Okay. I can wait then?" "Yeah," I said. "Sure." After that, silence settled between us. Not the uncomfortable kind. Worse. The kind that feels like it's waiting for something to happen. I offered her coffee without thinking too much about it. She accepted. I made it badly because I always do when I'm trying too hard not to think about what I'm doing. She sat at the kitchen table while I leaned against the counter, pretending I wasn't watching her. But I was. I was more aware of every movement than I should have been. At one point, she looked up and said, "Do you always stare at people like that?" The spoon nearly slipped from my hand. "I wasn't staring," I said. She tilted her head slightly. "You were." There was no judgment in her voice. Just observation. Like she was pointing out something factual, not emotional. I didn't respond. She smiled again, softer this time. "It's okay." That should have ended the moment. But it didn't. Because something about the way she said it made it feel like she wasn't just forgiving a glance. She was acknowledging something neither of us had said out loud yet. And I hated how much that mattered to me. That was the first time I realized something I immediately wished I hadn't. I liked being seen by her. Not by everyone. Just her. And that made everything complicated in a way I wasn't ready to name. After she left that day, the house felt different. Not physically. Nothing had changed. The same walls, the same furniture, the same sounds. But I was aware of something I hadn't been aware of before. Silence has weight when you start filling it with thoughts you shouldn't have. When Julia came back later that evening, she and Sarah filled the house like usual, talking over each other, planning something for the weekend, laughing too easily, too naturally. And I stood there, participating just enough to not stand out, pretending I was still the same version of myself who hadn't just spent an afternoon noticing every detail of her best friend's presence. But I wasn't that version anymore. Not completely. Because now there was something inside me I couldn't unnotice. A shift. Small, quiet, but irreversible. That night, I told myself it didn't mean anything. People notice people. That's all it was. But sleep didn't agree with me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments instead of dreams. Her hands around the coffee cup, her voice saying my name when Julia wasn't listening, the brief moment of eye contact that lasted half a second too long to be meaningless. Just ordinary things. And yet they kept repeating like they were trying to become something more important than they had the right to be. Outside my room the house was still. Inside my head it wasn't. Because somewhere between familiarity and danger, Sarah had stopped being just my sister's best friend. And I hadn't stopped it in time. Worse than that. I wasn't sure I wanted to. After that day I started noticing time differently. Not in a dramatic way. Nothing obvious changed. The house still sounded the same when Julia and Sarah were around. The same footsteps, the same overlapping voices, the same chaotic comfort that came with them together. But I started waiting for Sarah more than I was willing to admit. Not actively. Not consciously. It was worse than that. I noticed her absence. That was new. Before, she had been just part of the background of my sister's life. Now, when she wasn't there, the house felt strangely incomplete, like a sentence missing a word you can't quite name but still feel. The next time she came over alone, I almost pretended I wasn't home. Not because I didn't want to see her. Because I did. Too much. I heard her voice first, coming from the hallway. Hey. Julia said I could wait here again. And then I heard my sister yelling from somewhere outside, I'll be back in like an hour. So it was just us again. That realization hit faster than I expected. I walked into the kitchen and found her standing in the same general spot as last time, but this time she didn't look as hesitant. Still careful, but less like she was asking permission from the room itself. Hey, I said. Hey, she replied. There was a pause. Not awkward, just loaded in a way neither of us acknowledged. You're early, I added. She shrugged slightly. I finished class sooner. Plus, right. I had to remind myself she had a life outside of this house, outside of my awareness of her. I can leave if I'm bothering you, she said again, like it was a habit she hadn't unlearned yet. You're not bothering me. This time I didn't answer too quickly. That seemed to matter. She nodded like she accepted it more easily now. I'll just wait then. And again the silence settled. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had memory in it. Like the room remembered us. I made coffee again. Better this time, though not intentionally. I was just less nervous than before. Or maybe more used to being nervous around her. She sat at the table, scrolling on her phone for a while before putting it face down. You always make it feel like I'm interrupting something, she said suddenly. I looked at her. Interrupting what? She lifted her shoulders. I don't know. Something. Your space maybe. You're not. She studied me for a moment like she was trying to decide whether I meant it. Then she said quieter, okay. And I realized something small but important. She was starting to believe me. That should have made things easier. It didn't. Because now it felt like responsibility. Like I was crossing into something where my reactions mattered more than I wanted them to. At some point she laughed at something on her phone, soft, quick, almost surprised by her own reaction. I looked up without meaning to. She noticed. Of course she did. Sorry, she said automatically. It was just, never mind. No, I said before I could stop myself. What? She hesitated. Then showed me the screen briefly. Something stupid. A video. Nothing important. But we ended up laughing anyway. It was short. Controlled. Like neither of us trusted it enough to last. But it happened. And that was enough to change the atmosphere again. After that, conversation came easier. Not natural. Not effortless. Just easier. Like we had accidentally opened a door and were pretending not to notice the room behind it. At one point, she leaned back in her chair and said, You're quieter than I expected. I raised an eyebrow. Expected? I mean, Julia talks about you like you're super serious. I snorted slightly. That's generous. She smiled. Are you not? Depends. On what? I hesitated. Then answered honestly without meaning to think about it. On who's around. The words hung there a second longer than they should have. Her expression changed slightly, not obvious but there. Like she noticed something in the tone more than the content. And me? She asked. The question was simple. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. I looked at her for a moment too long before saying, You make it harder to stay serious. There was a pause. Then she laughed softly but differently this time. Less certain. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. It wasn't meant as one. That made her look at me again. Properly this time. Not casually. Not passingly. And I felt something shift, not between us physically but in awareness. Like we had both stepped slightly closer without moving. The rest of the afternoon passed normally after that. Too normally. Julia came home eventually, loud and energetic as always, filling the space immediately. Sarah switched back into her usual rhythm beside her, laughing more, talking faster, slipping into the role she always had in my sister's life. And I watched it happen like I had stepped behind glass. Same people. Different distance. Later that night, when everything quieted down, I found myself replaying that conversation in fragments. Not the words exactly. The pauses between them. Because that was where everything was starting to live now. In what wasn't said. And I began to understand something I didn't like. It wasn't just that I was noticing her. It was that she was starting to notice me noticing her. And neither of us had decided what to do about that yet. But something was already deciding for us. Slowly. Quietly. In the space between normal. After that afternoon, things didn't change in any obvious way. That was the strange part. If something is going to become dangerous, you expect it to announce itself. To shift the world in a way you can point at and say that's where it started. But this didn't do that. It just settled deeper. Sarah still came over with Julia. Still sat on the couch laughing at things I wasn't always part of. Still spoke in that same calm rhythm that made her feel like she was never in a rush to exist. But now there were moments, small, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, where something else slipped through. A glance that lasted half a second too long. A pause that felt like it was holding a question back. Or worse, my awareness of it. That was the part one couldn't ignore anymore. The next shift happened on a late afternoon when Julia was out again. Sarah showed up earlier than expected. Rain outside. Not heavy, just enough to make everything feel slower. She shook her hair slightly when she came in, dropping her bag near the door. "Your sister said I could wait," she said like it was becoming routine now. "I know," I replied. She looked at me. "You sound like you don't believe me." "I believe you." That made her smile faintly. "Good. Because I'm not great at breaking into houses." I should have laughed. I did, but later than I should have. She noticed. Of course she did. We ended up in the kitchen again because that was where everything between us seemed to happen without us deciding it. I made coffee again. She didn't ask this time. She just sat down like she belonged there. That realization hit me harder than it should have. At some point she said, "You're always doing that." "Doing what?" "Thinking before you answer." I leaned back slightly against the counter. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It's just noticeable." That word again. Noticeable. It felt like that was what we were becoming to each other. Not something defined. Not something named. Just noticeable. I didn't respond right away. She stirred her coffee slowly, then added, "Julia says you don't talk much." "That's not true." "She says you choose when to." I paused. "That sounds more accurate." She smiled at that. Then, quieter, almost casually, she said, "You talk more when it's just us." The sentence wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even curiosity. It was observation again. But this time it landed differently. Because she was right. And I didn't know if she was supposed to be. I looked at her for a moment too long before answering, "Maybe it depends on the company." She didn't look away. "Am I better company than Julia?" It was said lightly. Almost like a joke. But neither of us treated it like one. I should have answered quickly. Deflected. Changed direction. Instead I said, "Different." That made her tilt her head slightly. "That's not an answer." "It is. Just not the one you want." A small silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just aware. She nodded slowly, like she accepted that more than she should have. "Fair," she said. Then she added, "I think I like that you don't pretend." I felt something tighten slightly in my chest at that. Because I wasn't sure it was true. I was pretending constantly. Just not about the things she thought. Outside, the rain got slightly heavier. The kitchen felt warmer in contrast. She looked out the window for a moment, then said almost absent-mindedly, "It's weird how this feels normal now." I glanced at her. "What does?" "This," she said, gesturing slightly between us. "Waiting here. Talking." I didn't answer immediately. Because I felt it too. And that was the problem. "It shouldn't feel normal," I said finally. She turned back to me. "Why not?" The question was simple. Too simple. I hesitated. Because the answer wasn't something I could say out loud without changing everything. "Because of Julia," I said instead. Her expression shifted slightly, not surprised, just thoughtful. "I know," she said. That was all. No denial. No discomfort. Just acceptance. And somehow that made it worse. Because it meant she was thinking about it too. We didn't talk much after that. Not because it became awkward. Because it didn't. It just became quieter. Like we had both stepped closer to a line neither of us was naming. Before she left that day, she paused near the door. You're going to overthink this, she said. I frowned slightly. What? This, she repeated. Us talking like this. I didn't answer, because she was right again. And I hated how easily she read that. She smiled faintly, almost apologetic. Don't? Then she left. And the house immediately felt too empty. Not because she was gone. Because something between us hadn't left with her. That night I tried to go back to normal. I didn't succeed. Every small interaction replayed in my head, but not as memories. As measurements. How long she looked at me. How quickly I answered. How easily she noticed things I didn't say. And the worst realization wasn't attraction. It was recognition. We were starting to understand each other in a way that didn't feel accidental anymore. And I couldn't tell who was leading it, or if it even had a leader at all. Only that it was moving. Quietly. In the direction neither of us had admitted yet. At some point, I stopped believing distance would fix anything. Not because I tried it in any real way. There was nothing dramatic like avoiding her or changing routines. It was more subtle than that. I tried to act like I didn't notice what was happening. Like noticing less could somehow make it go away. It didn't. If anything, it made everything louder in my head. Sarah kept coming over. Julia kept being Julia, bright, chaotic, completely unaware of anything happening beneath the surface she controlled so easily. And Sarah stayed in between those two worlds as she always had. But now I started seeing something I couldn't unsee. She had a way of looking at me when Julia wasn't paying attention. Not obvious. Not long enough to be called anything. But enough that I started catching myself waiting for it. That was the problem. Waiting. It turns things from accidental into intentional, even when they aren't. The moment it really shifted again was a night when everything felt too normal. Julia had gone out with friends. Sarah stayed behind, saying she was tired and didn't feel like going. I remember thinking that was unusual. Not because she never stayed. But because she usually followed Julia without hesitation, like gravity didn't give her another option. That night she didn't. She was sitting on the couch when I came out of my room. Legs tucked under her, hair slightly messy, phone in her hand but not really being used. Hey, she said. Hey. That alone felt different. No noise around it. No interruption from Julia's presence. Just us. I sat in the armchair across from her, not too close. That was something I still did automatically. Like distance could keep things classified. It couldn't. After a while she said, "Your house is weird when it's quiet." I glanced at her. "It's always quiet like this when Julia's out." "I know," she said. "But I notice it more now." More now. She looked at me briefly. Yeah. That was all she said. But it hung there. Like she meant something she wasn't expanding. I shifted slightly in my seat. "Why?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe because I notice more things in general now." I didn't respond right away. Because I had the uncomfortable feeling she wasn't talking about the house anymore. She looked down at her phone again, then set it aside completely. That was new too. Sarah always kept something between herself and silence. Not that night. "Do you ever think about how easy it is to misunderstand people?" she asked suddenly. I frowned slightly. "That's a random question." "I know," she said. "But do you?" I thought about it. "Yes," I admitted. She nodded slowly, like that was the answer she expected. "I think about it a lot," she said. "Especially lately." Something in my chest tightened again. "Because of Julia?" I asked. She hesitated. That hesitation mattered. "Not just her," she said. That was the moment the air changed. Not dramatically. Not visibly. But something in the space between us stopped pretending. I looked at her longer than I should have. She didn't look away. And for the first time, there wasn't uncertainty in her expression. Just awareness. Clear, unhidden awareness. "I think we both know what we're doing," she said quietly. My throat tightened slightly. "Do we?" She gave a small, almost tired smile. "We're avoiding saying it." Silence. Not empty this time. Full. Heavy in a way that pressed against everything we hadn't defined yet. I stood up without thinking too much about it, walking toward the kitchen. Not to escape her, but to move. Movement felt safer than stillness. She didn't follow immediately, but I heard her a moment later. Her voice came from behind me. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Thinking too hard." I let out a quiet breath. "Someone has to." She leaned against the counter a few steps away. Not too close. Not far either. That in-between distance again. "I don't think this is complicated," she said. I turned slightly toward her. "It is." "Because of Julia?" she said again. "Yes." She nodded slowly. That part is simple. That surprised me. I frowned. Simple? She looked at me directly. She's my best friend. I know what that means. And? I asked. And I'm not pretending I don't, she said. There it was. Direct. Unsoftened. My mind struggled to catch up with how easily she said it. That doesn't make anything easier, I said. I didn't say it did. Another silence. This one different. Less theoretical. More real. She pushed herself slightly off the counter. You act like everything has to be decided in advance. I don't, I said automatically. She raised an eyebrow slightly. You do. That landed too close to something true. I didn't answer. She stepped a little closer. Not enough to be dramatic, just enough that I had to acknowledge the space between us had changed. I'm not asking you to decide anything, she said quietly. My voice came out lower than I expected. Then what are you asking? She hesitated. Just for a second. Then, to stop acting like this is nothing. That was the first time she sounded unsure. Not about me. About herself. And that changed everything again. Because it meant I wasn't the only one losing control of the narrative I thought I was maintaining. I looked at her for a long moment. And for the first time, I didn't try to step back from what I felt. I'm not acting like it's nothing, I said. She studied me carefully. Then softly, good. The word shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. Because it wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a car passed. The sound barely registered. Everything else felt too close. Too present. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about what we shouldn't be doing. And started realizing what was already happening anyway. After that night, nothing became official. That's what I kept expecting. Some clear shift. Some moment where everything would snap into a defined shape. Confession, agreement, consequences. But life doesn't organize itself that neatly. Instead, things just stopped pretending. Sarah still came over. Julia still filled rooms like she owned the atmosphere. The structure of our lives stayed exactly the same on the surface. But underneath it, something had changed its rules. We stopped acting like we didn't know. Not out loud. Never out loud. Just in the way we looked at each other when no one else was paying attention. Just in the pauses that lasted a second too long. Just in the fact that neither of us tried to close the distance anymore. It started small. A conversation that ended but didn't fully end. A glance that lingered. A moment in the kitchen where she stood closer than necessary while reaching for something, and neither of us moved away. That was the first time I realized, nothing was stopping this anymore except the idea that it should be stopped. And ideas are fragile things when they stop being enforced. One afternoon, Julia left earlier than expected again. She was always moving. Plans, friends, errands, something always pulling her out of the house like stillness didn't belong to her. Sarah stayed behind. Of course she did. By now that didn't feel unusual. It felt structured. Like something we both understood without naming it. I found her in the living room, sitting on the floor instead of the couch, leaning back against it like she didn't feel like occupying space properly. You're doing that thing again, she said when I walked in. I frowned slightly. What thing? Thinking before you talk. I leaned against the doorway instead of entering fully. It's not a thing. It is, she said simply. That small smile appeared again. The one that didn't ask permission. I walked in slowly this time. Not stopping at the usual distance. Not closing it either. Just not maintaining it. That mattered. She noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked up then stayed there. Julia's coming back late, she said. I know, I replied. Another silence. But different now. Not waiting. Just existing. She tilted her head slightly. You're calmer today. I'm not, I said honestly. That made her exhale a soft laugh. No, she agreed. You're just less resistant. I didn't answer. Because she was right. And I didn't know when that had started. She pushed herself up from the floor, sitting on the couch instead now, leaving space beside her. Not asking. Just leaving it there. And that was worse in its own way. Because it meant the decision wasn't being made in steps anymore. It was already assumed. I sat down. Not too close. But closer than before. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was aware. Sarah looked forward for a moment, then said quietly, This is the part where people usually lie to themselves. I glanced at her. About what? About what they're doing, she said. I nodded slightly. People do that a lot. She turned to look at me then. Are you? The question wasn't sharp. But it was direct enough that it didn't need to be. I didn't answer immediately. Because the honest answer wasn't simple. No, I said finally. That seemed to land between us in a way neither of us reacted to outwardly. But something shifted anyway. She studied me for a second longer than usual. Then she said, "Good." Again that word. Different tone this time. Less confirmation. More alignment. We didn't talk after that for a while. The room felt smaller but not in a suffocating way. More like everything unnecessary had been removed. At some point she leaned back slightly, her shoulder almost brushing mine. Almost. That word mattered now. I didn't move away. Neither did she. It wasn't sudden. Nothing about it was sudden anymore. Just gradual proximity that neither of us interrupted. Her voice was quieter when she spoke again. "Do you ever think about how easily this could ruin things?" "Yes," I said. "Does it stop you?" Pause. Then, "No." She nodded like that was expected. "Same," she said. And that was it. No confession. No defining statement. Just two people acknowledging they had already crossed something invisible. Later, when the light outside started shifting toward evening, she checked her phone once. Then put it away again. "I should probably go soon," she said but didn't move. "I know," I replied. She didn't stand up immediately. Neither did I. The space between us felt different now. Not uncertain. Just unresolved. She turned her head slightly toward me. "This is dangerous, you know." "I know," I said again. She gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Still here?" she said. That was the closest thing to a choice either of us had made so far. And it wasn't spoken like a question. It was spoken like a fact we were both already living inside. When she finally stood, she didn't leave right away. She lingered at the edge of the room, like leaving required stepping out of something more than a house. Before she walked out, she looked back once. Not long. Just enough. And I understood something very clearly in that moment. Nothing about this was going to stay theoretical anymore. We had already moved past that. And whatever came next wasn't going to ask permission either. After that, everything started feeling like it had a second layer. On the surface, life kept behaving normally. Julia still filled the house with noise whenever she was around. Sarah still matched her rhythm perfectly, like they were built from the same kind of energy. Conversation still happened in overlapping bursts, plans still got made, laughter still came too easily. If someone had been watching from the outside, nothing would have looked different. But I was no longer on the outside of it. And neither was she. Sarah and I didn't change in obvious ways. That would have been too simple. Instead, we became consistent in something quieter. We stopped pretending distance was necessary. We stopped correcting small moments that didn't need correction. We stopped stepping back first. It sounds minor when written like that. It wasn't. It was the difference between something imagined and something ongoing. One evening, Julia left for a late dinner with friends. She didn't even ask Sarah to come this time, which was unusual enough that it lingered in the air after she left. Sarah stayed behind anyway. No explanation needed anymore. She was already there when I came out of my room, sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up slightly, watching something on her phone but not fully engaged in it. She looked up when she heard me. "You're always quiet when you walk," she said. "I don't try to be," I replied. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it worse." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "Worse?" "More noticeable," she corrected herself. That word again. Noticeable. It had followed us for days now like a shared language neither of us admitted to learning. I sat down, not across from her this time. Beside her. The distance between us wasn't closed all at once. It never was. But it was no longer being maintained. She didn't react outwardly. But I saw it in her posture. A subtle awareness. Like something in her had registered the change even if she didn't comment on it. After a while she said, "Do you ever feel like we're pretending we don't know what we're doing?" I didn't answer immediately. Because the honest answer was yes. And had been for a while. "Yes," I said finally. She nodded slowly. "I thought so." Silence followed. But it wasn't empty. It felt like it was waiting for permission to become something else. She shifted slightly, turning toward me just a little more. "Julia trusts me," she said. I looked at her. "I know." That was all I said. She didn't react to my tone. She already understood what it meant. "I keep thinking about that," she continued. "More than I should." Pause. Then she added, "Do you?" I exhaled quietly. Yes. There was no relief in saying it. Only recognition. She looked down at her hands for a moment. Then back up. "I'm not confused," she said softly. That caught my attention. "About what?" I asked. "About this," she said. "The simplicity of it should have made things easier. It didn't. Because it removed one of the last remaining excuses for hesitation. I stayed quiet. She leaned back slightly into the couch but didn't move away from me. "You're the one thinking in circles," she said. "That's not wrong," I admitted. A faint smile. "I know." The silence stretched again, but differently this time. Less like uncertainty. More like pressure building without direction. At some point, her shoulder brushed mine. Accidentally at first. Neither of us moved. That changed it from accident to decision without anything being said. Her voice was quieter when she spoke again. "This would be easier if I didn't care about her." I shook my head slightly. "No, it wouldn't." She looked at me. "You think it would be harder?" "I think it would just be different," I said. "But not easier." That made her pause. Then she nodded slowly, like she accepted that even if she didn't like it. "You're not trying to justify it," she said. "No," I replied. That mattered. More than I expected it to. Because neither of us was building a story to make this acceptable. We were just acknowledging it. As it was. A car passed outside. The sound barely reached us. She tilted her head slightly. "I don't want to hurt her," she said. "I know," I answered. "But I don't want to stop either," she added. That sentence didn't need expansion. It was already complete. I didn't respond immediately. Because anything I could have said would have either been too much or not enough. So I said the only honest thing available. "I don't either." That was the real crossing. Not touch. Not closeness. Not silence. Agreement. Not moral agreement. Existential agreement. We stayed like that for a while. Not moving forward. Not moving away. Just existing in something that was no longer becoming but already there. Eventually she exhaled slowly and leaned her head back against the couch. "This is going to get worse," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. Pause. Then she added, almost like a thought spoken too late to stop it, "But I think I'm already in it." I looked at her. And for the first time, there was no hesitation left to navigate around. "Me too," I said. And neither of us laughed. Because it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a point of no return we had already passed without marking the moment. And the scariest part wasn't what we were doing. It was how natural it had started to feel before we ever agreed to it. It didn't happen all at once. That was the part one didn't expect. I used to think moments like this came with impact. Something visible, undeniable. A confession, a break, a sudden change in how the world reacts. But instead, it happened the way most real things do when they've already been decided long before you notice. Quietly, without permission, without announcement. It was just another evening when Julia wasn't home. Just another time Sarah stayed behind. Just another version of a pattern we had stopped questioning. But this time the silence felt different from the start. Not heavier. Just final in a way neither of us had named yet. Sarah was sitting on the couch when I came in, her legs folded under her like she had been there longer than she actually had. No phone in her hand this time. No distraction. Just presence. She looked up immediately. Like she had been waiting for the sound of my footsteps specifically. "You're late," she said softly. "I wasn't," I replied. That small exchange should have meant nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing anymore. I sat beside her without hesitation now. No internal calculation about distance. No thought about where I should be. That alone changed the atmosphere. She noticed. Of course she did. For a while neither of us spoke. Not because there was nothing to say. Because everything we might have said had already been circling for days, weeks, moments that had stacked on top of each other until language started feeling unnecessary. Outside, the world continued normally. Cars passed. Distant voices moved through the street. Life functioning exactly as it should. Inside, it felt like we were the only two people who had stopped pretending time was neutral. Sarah shifted slightly, turning toward me. Not dramatically. Just enough that the space between us stopped being abstract. "I keep thinking about something," she said. I looked at her. "What?" Her gaze didn't move away. "How long we've been doing this without calling it anything." That word again. Anything. I exhaled slowly. "We didn't want to call it anything." "That's not the same thing," she said. She was right. And we both knew it. Silence followed, but it wasn't uncertain anymore. It was full of recognition. She leaned back slightly but didn't create distance. That mattered now in a way it hadn't before. "Julia would hate this," she said quietly. I nodded once. Yes. That was all. No defense. No justification. Just truth acknowledged. Sarah stared at the ceiling for a moment, then spoke again, softer. "I don't feel like I'm lying," she said. I turned my head slightly toward her. That's the worst part, I admitted. She let out a quiet breath that almost became a laugh but didn't quite get there. I know. Pause. Then she added, it doesn't feel like something I chose at a single point. I don't think it works like that, I said. She looked at me again. So when did it start? The question hung there. Not urgent. Not demanding. Just present. I thought about it. About coffee in the kitchen. About conversations that lasted a second too long. About silence that started feeling like agreement instead of absence. I don't know, I said honestly. That's the problem. She nodded slowly, like that answer made sense even if it wasn't satisfying. Then she shifted slightly closer. Not closing the space completely. Just changing its meaning. I'm not scared of this anymore, she said. I looked at her for a long moment. You should be, I replied. A faint smile touched her lips. Maybe I was, she said. At the beginning. And now? She didn't answer immediately. Then quietly. Now it just feels like something I stopped resisting. That sentence settled between us differently than anything before it. Not as confession. Not as decision. As confirmation of a direction already taken. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt exactly, not relief either. Something closer to inevitability. We sat there for a moment longer. Still not touching. Still not needing to. But no longer pretending there was a version of this where we were just talking. Sarah turned her head slightly, her voice lower now. I don't want to hurt her, she said again. I know, I answered. Pause. Then she added, but I don't think I can undo this anymore. I didn't respond right away. Because that was the truth neither of us had said fully until now. Not that we were choosing it. But that we were already inside it. And undoing it would require becoming different people than the ones sitting there. I looked at her. And finally said the only honest thing left. Neither can I. That was the moment the secret stopped being a secret. Not because anyone else knew. But because we did. And once you reach that point, the hiding doesn't end. It just changes shape. Sarah exhaled slowly, then leaned back into the couch again. But this time there was no tension in it. Just acceptance. Not of consequences. Of reality. Outside, a door closed somewhere in the building. A normal sound in a normal world. Inside, nothing about us felt normal anymore. And still, neither of us moved away. The first thing I learned about power is that it doesn't feel like arrival. Feels like continuity. Like you've been inserted into a system that was already running long before you understood your place in it, and will keep running long after you stop trying to define yourself through it. Virion systems didn't slow down after the transition. It stabilized. That difference mattered. Chaos would have meant resistance. Resistance would have meant something personal. But what I got instead was adaptation. Clean, efficient, almost indifferent adaptation. People adjusted their reporting lines. Projects were paused, reevaluated, or quietly discontinued. Contracts were reviewed with a level of care that made it clear everyone understood the same unspoken rule. Nothing emotional would survive long in this new phase. And I became the reference point for that recalibration. Not as a figure of admiration. Not as a villain. But as a constraint the system now had to account for. At first I thought that would feel like control. It didn't. It felt like weight distributed across too many moving parts to ever fully see at once. Every decision I made, every approval, every pause, every structural change, created ripples I could trace but never fully contain. Virion wasn't a company anymore in my mind. It was a network of dependencies reacting to a new central variable. Me. Elena adapted faster than I expected. Not emotionally. Structurally. She stopped referencing my position in personal terms. She stopped trying to interpret it through the lens of our marriage. Instead, she operated strictly within professional boundaries, as if drawing a line between two versions of reality she could no longer allow to overlap. That distance was more disciplined than anything I had seen from her before. It also said more than any confrontation could have. She didn't challenge the system. She learned how to move inside it without breaking alignment. 6 weeks after the executive review, she submitted her resignation. No announcement. No escalation. No attempt to negotiate position or influence. Just a formal exit, processed cleanly through HR channels, like a system component shutting down without disrupting the rest of the architecture. She left a letter on my desk. I didn't open it immediately. That hesitation surprised me more than anything else in the entire process. Because by then I had learned to treat everything as structure first. Emotion later. If at all. When I finally read it, there was no accusation in it. No bitterness either. Just clarity. I misread stability as limitation, she wrote. I understand now that I never measured the full system I was operating inside. That line stayed with me longer than I expected. Because it wasn't about me. Not really. It was about perception failure. And in systems like Virion, perception failure is more dangerous than operational failure. I didn't respond. There was nothing to correct. Nothing to add. Only distance. In the months that followed, Virion continued to evolve under constant internal recalibration. Some executives left. Others rose. A few reorganized entire divisions in anticipation of direction shifts that never fully came from me but were instead inferred from patterns in how I evaluated structure. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who owned the company. That word didn't fit anymore. Ownership implies distance. This was proximity without escape. Every system I touched adjusted itself slightly around me, like a living organism adapting to a new organ it hadn't evolved with but now depended on. And through all of it, one realization became impossible to ignore. The inheritance hadn't given me power. It had removed my ability to pretend I wasn't already part of something larger than my previous life could contain. There were moments I thought about stepping away. Not because I wanted freedom in any romantic sense, but because distance would have simplified everything. It would have turned complexity back into abstraction. But stepping away would also mean ignoring something I couldn't unsee anymore. That systems like this don't stop existing just because someone refuses responsibility for them. They just find another form of stability. And I wasn't sure I trusted what that alternative would look like. Elena and I didn't reconcile. We didn't fall apart dramatically either. That part surprised me most. There was no explosion. No final argument that defined everything retroactively. Just a gradual, mutual recognition that our lives had been reorganized around different interpretations of the same event. Sometimes I wondered if she resented me. Other times I thought she didn't have the energy for resentment anymore. What stayed between us wasn't conflict. It was distance shaped by understanding too late to change anything. One evening, long after things had settled into routine again, I found myself alone in the office looking over system maps. Not dashboards this time. Dependency structures. The invisible architecture of decisions I had made and decisions made around me. And I realized something that felt uncomfortably simple. The higher you go in a system like this, the fewer people can speak to you without changing their behavior first. Not because you demand it, but because the system does. That realization didn't feel like victory. It felt like narrowing. Like the space around you slowly adapting until only certain types of interactions remain possible. I closed the files and sat there for a while without looking at anything. Not thinking about strategy. Not thinking about outcomes. Just sitting with the fact that everything I had inherited had also inherited something from me. And that there was no clean separation anymore between who I was before and what I had become part of. Power, I understood finally, wasn't about control. It was about responsibility that doesn't reduce when you stop looking at it. And Virion systems would continue long after any personal story inside it faded into irrelevance. Including mine. Including hers. The only question that remained was whether I was still willing to be the person holding the part of the system that required someone to decide what stability actually meant. And for now, the answer wasn't something the system cared about. It only cared that there was an answer at all.